recording. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everyone that's coming to join. Some people I can see are in their home, their office, their studios. Some people are in some kind of golden brain, like sort of synapsey world, very matrixy, and some people are kind of commuting to or from work, or hopefully to somewhere fun, or work if work is also fun. I don't know where your backgrounds are. Um, as you sort of heard, and some of you may already know me, I have been a designer for many, many years. I was an early proponent of web standards. I wrote a book many years ago. I wrote a book probably 20 years ago called CSS Mastery. It's one of the first CSS books out there, one of the first CSS design books, back when it was a new thing. Obviously, it seems like a long time ago because it's now just the way we do things, but back then it was quite novel. And at one stage, that book was outselling Harry Potter before we knew that the author of Harry Potter was about to go in some unusual and possibly undesirable direction. So I'm quite glad I was outselling Harry Potter for a while. The act of writing a book was traumatic. I wouldn't advise it for anybody. And so for many years, I said, I'm never doing that again. But then, weirdly, one Christmas, I accidentally wrote a book. What actually happened was I gave a talk about growth, about startup growth. And I thought, oh, this is quite useful. I'll try and turn it into an article. And I had a bit of time, I think it was like Christmas 2022, maybe. I had a bit of time at the end of Christmas before work started, and I started writing and writing and writing and writing. And there's just this massive upwelling, this outpouring of stuff came out. And in about 6 weeks, I'd written about 20,000 words. And I was like, well, this is far too big to be an article. This is far too big probably to be a series of articles. Like, and so I did a bit of research, like what's the average length of a book? I think it was 12,000 actually I wrote. And it said like an average book length was about 20,000. And so I thought, well, maybe I could turn this into a small book. And I kept on writing and I went through 20, I went through 30, I went through 40. And in the end, I kind of wrote a pretty sort of, decent sized book, not too big. It's kind of a long plane ride's worth of a read or a couple of short trips to Europe, wherever you're based in the world. But it came out of a couple of things. So like I said, I'll jump back a second. So I'm a designer at heart. I've ran agencies for many years. I have a strong belief in the power of design. I think design is a really important sort of change for good, sort of, a change agent. I got into design because I was frustrated about how the world was working and how it was broken. I'd go and try and buy tickets from a train ticket machine and end up buying the wrong ticket or buying the more expensive ticket or just getting frustrated. I would try and use early websites and they were just frustrating and confusing. And so I realized, like I'm not a rocket scientist, I'm not a healthcare professional, I can't sort of solve many of the world's problems. But if I can make everyone's life 1 or 2% nicer when they interact with technology, I'm hopefully having a net good in the world. Now, as a designer, I can work on big websites and small websites and I can make a big difference. But if I started an agency, I could multiply my impact. And so I started an agency. We became the first UX design agency in the world. Sorry, not in the world, in the UK, inspired by a company called Adaptive Path, who were one of the first ones in the US. And for many years, we were kind of driving the adoption of UX design. In order to get that going faster, like my agency could do 10 websites a year, 20 websites a year, but I started public speaking because I thought if I went to conferences, I could inspire more designers. And then I started running conferences, UX London, Leading Design, Deconstruct, because if I could talk to a whole room full of 100 people, 500 people, and get them putting more good design in the world, we would benefit. But I started coming up with this problem. And the problem I was coming up against was that while all the designer friends I knew cared about design, not many other people did. I would start talking to business people, I talked to engineers, and they had a massive misunderstanding of what design was about. Most people still to this day think design is making things look pretty, and all the actual important work gets done by somebody else. Maybe it's the founder, maybe it's the business team, maybe it's a product manager. But often by the time work comes to designers, all of the big decisions has often been made. And this is really frustrating because a lot of designers are taught that they are problem solvers. And by the time the work gets to us, often a lot of the problems have been solved, or worse, they haven't been solved, but no one cares. No one's looking for the problems. They just want you to ship. Often this world we find ourselves in is called a feature factory, where we're just given stuff to kind of make look pretty and push out. And so I found this rather frustrating. And so in my agency world, I was constantly trying to stretch the um, the vision and the horizon of my agency clients. I was trying to talk to CEOs, I was trying to talk to CPOs, I was trying to talk to CTOs and get them to understand the value of design. But it was hard, it was an uphill struggle. And also, a lot of the time when I was advising things, the people I was working with were always slightly unsure whether I was suggesting these things because they were the right thing to do or because as an agency I could charge more. So if I'd say to people, you need to do some usability testing here, people would go, well, that's great, but is Andy really saying we need to do usability testing, or does he have a bored researcher sitting on the bench at the moment, wanting some work? And so my desire to promote design, and our clients' need to spend money wisely were not necessarily aligned in terms of incentives, and so it was always a little bit hard to do that. I left the agency world probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And I did two things. And so my day job at the moment involves 2 days a week coaching. I coach design and product leaders, heads, directors, VPs of design and product. And a lot of the people I coach have the same problems I used to have. They're in an organization that doesn't really value design, where the business leaders don't loop them in early enough, and they really struggle to present the value of design to those businesses. And so for 2 days a week, I help design leaders navigate that challenge to a greater or lesser extent. But one thing I realized is that it's really difficult to convince somebody that runs a multi-million-dollar business that design is important if they got to the point of running a multi-million-dollar business, i.e. making millions of dollars, without even having to think about design. When the designer comes along and says, you don't know what you're doing, CEO, I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to train you, and I'm going to educate you. And we like this idea of training our executive team. They look at us and go, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I run $1 million business, like a multi-million-dollar business, $100 million business. Who are you to come and tell me how this works? And so a lot of the designers I coach really have an uphill struggle because the companies have been successful despite design rather than because design. And if you work in an environment where your company's been successful despite design, trying to convince them of the value of design is really difficult. And so I started thinking, well, how can I change that? How can I affect companies at the earliest stage of their existence, whereby they start to value design from day one, and so that they hire a designer early on, and they hire a designer not begrudgingly or because they're meant to, but because they want to, how they can start seeing the value of their business grow because of the input of design. And so that when they have a design leader running a team of 5, 10, 50, 100 people, that design leader isn't battling to convince the founder that design is important. That founder's already bought in because they've got to where they are today because design played a massive part in that. And so I became a VC. Now, don't hate me. Like, there's a lot of stuff out there with VCs, and there are some real terrible VCs out there. I wanted to be one of the good VCs. I wanted to go to people, and rather than ask them for money, I give them money. I slide a briefcase full of used, $100 bills over the counter. I don't really, but you can imagine the visualization is a little bit more fun. And I say, here's some money. Here's $1 million. Go and build something amazing. I want you to turn that $1 million into 5 to 10 to 100, to $1 billion. And suddenly my outcomes are aligned with theirs. They're no longer worrying me, is the advice that Andy's giving me, is he giving it to me because he wants to take my money? They're realizing that the advice I'm giving them is because I want them to succeed, which has always been the case. And so they start to listen. They're much more likely to listen. However, I also realized that if I started telling founders from day one, design, 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 they would just stop listening and they put their fingers in their ears. The whole kind of idea of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't teach them to drink. You have to help founders get to a point where they are starting to feel the pain in the product, and then let them realize that design is one of a number of solutions to that pain. And then if they go and take that idea and they get the design and they hire the designers and they do the service design and they do the onboarding, the growth design, all that kind of stuff, and that starts leading them to solving their problems, to acquiring more customers, to helping those customers stick around for longer, so they're retained for longer, so you can make more money from those customers. Making sure those customers get delivered value, so those customers are enjoying the product, they're getting value out of the product. If you do all of these things and the founder realizes that design is a big part of that, then you've kind of got them. It's that kind of like show, don't tell attitude. I see so many designers that tell, and never show. You have to show. And so this is sort of where the book came in. So the book, The Growth Equation, like you might be wondering, here we go. This is an early draft. This is the real deal behind me. You might be wondering, like, why am I at a service design book club and there's this rabid capitalist VC person telling me about a book all aimed at early stage startups? I'm not an early stage founder, maybe. I'm not an early stage startup. I'm a designer. I'm a service designer. What has this all got to do with me? And one of the things I realized partly is founders and business people in general don't understand and don't care about design and really don't want to spend time understanding, and they want to be educated. But actually, a lot of the real problems that these companies have are design problems. Like I said, acquisition, retention, monetization. These are all the kind of things that great design teams, great service design teams, and product design teams can help solve. Now, I also started to get really frustrated. I was reading lots of books around startup growth, and none of them were written by designers. They were mostly written by product managers or business people or other founders. And what's worse, none of these books even mention design. Oh, we've got a growth problem. Oh, you should talk to your product manager. Oh, we've got a retention problem. Go and talk to your product manager. Oh, we've got a churn problem. So that's the same as retention. We've got an activation problem. Go and talk to your product manager. They never ever talked about design. And so what I wanted to do, and I can tell this to you, don't tell any other founders this, but I wanted to write a design book in stealth. I realized if I wrote a book that was titled Design for Founders, no founder would ever buy it. They would just hand it to their design team and go, "Oh, go and read that." So I had to write a book that was about the thing that founders care about. And what does founders care about? They care about growth. And why do they care about growth? Well, for a few things. If you're an early stage startup, growth is the thing that unlocks the next phase of funding. If you're a really early stage startup, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can land your first customer, your 10th customer, your 100th customer, your 1,000th customer. You need to be able to show that you can start by making $100 a month, and then 1,000, and then 10,000, and then 100,000. And if you can figure out how to do that, you are succeeding. You then raise your next round of funding, then you hire more people, you get more growth, you raise your next round of funding. It becomes this forcing function. And so if I can frame the value that design delivers in the language that founders care about and businesses care about, which is growth, then they're going to engage. And if they engage, then that opens up the possibility for us to do all the other things that we care about as designers, because design isn't just about growth. It's also about ethics, and it's about usability, and it's about understanding human needs, and it's about managing edge cases and all kinds of things. But we are not going to get the permission to do any of that if we aren't seen as part of the success story of the business. And so I wanted to write a design book for founders that was fundamentally about all of the amazing things that design and designers can do without it being called design. The interesting thing is I found a secondary audience, which is designers, because this book is all about the language of business. I've met a lot of founders that love this and don't realize it's a design book. But I've also met a lot of product managers and a lot of product designers, and probably less so service designers, to be honest. But designers in general have been reading the book and saying, "Hey, Andy, look, I know this book isn't aimed at me, but this really helps me understand the mindset of my founders. And it also really helps me understand the things they care about, the things I can kind of optimize for: acquisition, retention, activation, monetization. And if I can start doing these things, I can get some of these successes, some of these quick wins. If I can start leaning into product-led growth, which is really a design function, I think, rather than a business or a product function. If I can lean into product-led growth and my bosses care about what I do and I can solve their problems, then next time when I come to them and say, "Hey, look, last time I came to you, I had a brilliant idea to solve, your acquisition problem, and we fixed it, and acquisition's up by 20%. Now there's something else that I care about that is to do with usability or to do with, ethics or dark patterns that I really care about, and they're going to listen. And so I found a really, really interesting audience. Probably a good half of my readers are not founders, so maybe not even in a startup, but they are designers that want to be more au fait with business. And I see this a little bit like the Lean Startup. I've read the Lean Startup. Maybe you've read the Lean Startup. I don't work in a startup. I didn't work in a startup when I read the Lean Startup, but it was a book that had kind of broad value beyond just the needs of the audience. And so that's kind of where the book kind of comes from. So that was a little bit of a 20-minute introduction. I will happily stop there, and then I can dive into lots of different questions and angles. Or I can keep talking, because as you can see, I'm a chatty one. And so, I'm sure if you ask me a question, I can probably talk for another 20 minutes, no sweat. But yeah, I'll stop there and hand the mic back over to you.